Hey everybody, thank you for joining me today. Today I'm going to be interviewing Ben Nathanson. He's an advanced prostate cancer support group leader for an organization called ANCAN, and they do support for a lot of different diseases, and they run virtual support groups all over the world. You may have heard me talk about them before, but they're very important and dear to my heart, and I really appreciate them. But also dear to my heart is the man I get to interview today. We had an incredible conversation that was intimate and intricate to so many different things that he talks about. He has an incredible vocabulary, and I think I learned like 30 new words just reading his blog. And I really appreciate him as a person. So thank you so much, Ben, for being here. I just really appreciate you. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that I have heard about you through Rick Davis and AnCan, and they have spoken of your accolades, but I've also read your blog Progression, which is a Substack blog, which is really incredible. I love the way you write. You're able to help patients visualize prostate cancer differently, which I think is very unique. And so you have that engineer mindset with the visuals, and I think that's pretty impressive.
So I got to say, I'm thrilled to be speaking with PCRI when it comes to sharing knowledge with patients. No one has done more than Dr. Scholz. Every patient I meet has benefited by, including me, has benefited by patients from Dr. Scholz or PCRI. It's really a privilege to be here.
Can we talk about your prostate cancer journey? You're diagnosed in 2018. This is before COVID. And so what was that situation like? How old were you? What was your Gleason score? And what was that diagnosis process like from a mental and emotional standpoint?
It's interesting because this started out as an abundance of caution. My father had prostate cancer, and I had a very careful urologist who gave me a biopsy when my PSA was only a little high. After the biopsy, he said, your PSA runs a little high. So if you see it a little high, don't worry. What I failed to file away was that for him, a little high was above 3. So when my prostate, and so religiously every year I got a PSA exam. And so when I saw it was a little above 4, I misrecalled his words and thought, okay, this is not a big deal, until it became more and more difficult to urinate. I saw a urologist figuring it was just an old age thing, and a DRE revealed something worse was going on. My PSA at that time was 7. I continue to think it was all for the best. Bearing in mind the statistics that 99% of cases caught early are essentially cured.
So did you know that
yeah,
99% number before you were diagnosed or after?
I know it now, but I was I was sunny about the whole thing. I was confident that it was and would be nothing. I was hoping for the best right up until that afternoon when I got the call that, jumping ahead, that my salvage radiation had not worked and my PSA had risen again.
Okay. So when you were, having urination issues, did you just go to your urologist? You're getting a PSA check, and how did that process go? Did he do an MRI? What made him say we need to look into this further besides the urination issues?
So the original urologist had said, you have a small prostate. And then at a later point, he said, you have a large prostate. And when this new urologist did a DRE, he said, you have a nodular prostate. And I said, oh, I never heard that before. But the look on his face made it clear he was not seeing that as a joke. He scheduled an MRI. So I'd asked him about the biopsy. The way I knew I was seeing the right guy, he took out his phone and he showed me pictures of prostate MRIs.
Now, I love the way that you described seeing your prostate or even the pathology report. You called it the prostate mugshot. So
Yeah.
is that your first prostate mugshot, is seeing the MRI with the pictures with your physician?
At that point, they were alien blobs. And even when later on they went through the sections of it and tried to show it to me in detail, it was still colored blobs. I had faith in his ability to read it. I had faith in his ability to use it to guide the biopsy. Yeah, as far as taking it to heart, as far as internalizing it, as far as making sense of it, I didn't do so at that point.
That makes sense. So He shows you the MRI, and, at what point with the biopsy did you have like a random biopsy or targeted biopsy?
So he had what he had called a fusion biopsy. So it was in fact MRI guided. He was up on stuff. I I have confidence that he knew what he was doing.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, it's amazing that you found a urologist right away who was able to check you, know ahead of time, like, oh, you have a family history, we need to look at this, and then also have that technology at hand. Did you interview your urologist, or was this somebody that you had picked and you had just gone with it?
So he'd been recommended by my primary care physician, but I knew from the web, ask this guy how many prostatectomies he's done. He must have said at least 1,000. Um, but I'd have to look it up. And
Okay.
I knew if he'd lost count, if it was so many that he'd lost count, he was a guy who knew what he was doing. That was mostly my question for him.
When it comes to the urinary issues that you were having, that's not a typical, I think in the internet, we see these like really big scary ads or like up articles that come up when it says, oh, this is like a symptom of prostate cancer if you can't sleep or if you're not eating correctly. I mean, there's anything that they can tell
Yeah,
you at this point on the internet, especially with like, all these different blogs going on.
yeah.
But when it came to your urinary issues, how was that related to your prostate cancer diagnosis? Like, did you go in just thinking, oh, maybe it's an enlarged prostate issue, or I'm just can't not being able to pee okay? How did that relate to prostate cancer later?
I put off going, not because I'm afraid of doctors, but because I didn't want to have to take a pill to deal with it. I thought, oh, okay, I can deal with this. I can deal with this until I really couldn't. And I thought, okay, the worst that'll happen, he'll give me a pill.
Okay, so you have the, fusion biopsy and the MRI. You went in for urinary issues, and now, your pathology report came back. So what did it come back as, and how did you react to that situation?
Even in the core biopsy, they had seen that it was predominantly ductal. Without criticism, I have to say it was in small print and it was missed by everybody. I later saw it after the RP uh, pathology said it was ductal. I said, "Boy, I wonder if they'd known it then."
And the
And they
RP
they
is the
had.
surgical pathology
I'm
after you
sorry,
had your
yes, the
prostate
radical
off, right?
prostatectomy. Yes, yes.
Right.
Um, they knew it then, but in fact, it had been seen earlier, and it was believed to be a Gleason 4+3. Um, but I was hopeful. He, based on what he had seen, he said, "I'm not going to do nerve sparing surgery." He said, "I'm going to cut wide," and I said, "That's fine. It's fine." It was it was a huge prostate, and it took him hours to wrestle it out. He was covered in sweat after the surgery when he spoke to my wife.
So you went in knowing ahead of time he wasn't going to do nerve sparing, and you had faith in his ability, and obviously he had really developed that relationship with you. So after the surgery, what was that process like of healing and coming out of it, and how long did it take, and what effects did you have or not have?
So this is a part of the story that I'm I'm a little reluctant to share because cancer drives hard bargains, and I don't want people to be scared of what happened to me, to be scared into avoiding treatment. Um, these are the choices you have to make, and it's not as bad as you think it'll be. Recovery from the surgery itself was awful. It was one of the things I count among, the most unpleasant, the most hurtful things in my parts of my life. I couldn't lie down and I couldn't get up. I just slept sitting up on the couch for a few days.
How long did
Um,
that last?
um, Most of the week.
Okay.
And there was psychological terror too, because you have to pass gas at a certain point. In fact, this is a part of it that was particularly unpleasant. When they do the robotic assisted laparoscopy, they fill your abdomen with gas, and it's not the kind of gas where you can take simethicone and just burp it up. It stays there until it decides to leave. It gets reabsorbed. That was just incredibly, or it felt very unpleasant to have these gas bubbles that just would not go away. I was told it would be about a week of recovery, and it was a week, 10 days of recovery. Um, people tell you about the urinary catheter, and that too was no fun. There was at one point blockage, which scared me. It was covered with red. The urine was the bag of urine was red. It was it was frightening both physically and psychologically. It was not a fun recovery. But again, I'm reluctant to say this because it happens and it's over now. It's something that I have not thought about in detail since until just now when I'm speaking about it again. And I don't have to do it anymore. Some people with cancer have to go back for repeat surgeries. I'm done with this. This will never happen again.
When it came to having, not having nerve sparing surgery and the surgeon deciding to go wide, was that a conversation you had to have with your partner and your wife and say, hey, this is what he's going to do? Was there any concern from an intimacy level? Like, how is this going to be for us?
We were prepared to make adjustments as required. But this too has not been, you had asked about the aftermath after the recovery from the surgery itself. And it has been difficult for me. Years after the surgery, I remain incontinent, and I'm happy to wear diapers, but there are many cases where it becomes a real impediment. It's hard to go swimming. It's hard to take long walks. Um, I I became cynical because he would tell me how to do the Kegels as best he knew, and he would test my strength. And I remember, this is the urologist. I remember him telling me once, "You get the prize for this month. You have the strongest contractions of anybody," and it didn't get me anywhere. So I had another person in my support group at the time got his urinary incontinence back in a week, and I was hoping, and same urologist, and I was hoping that would happen for me, but it never has. Erections have certainly not returned. Um, and now, of course, I'm on the hormone therapy, so it almost doesn't matter.
So, is there any tips that you have when it comes to side effect management that either you wish you knew back then or you know now, that you think would be helpful for patients in that particular situation?
My biggest tip is marry an amazing woman. There's a lot to put up with. I leak in bed. I leak during sex. If you're overly fastidious, if you don't have love to carry you through, I could easily imagine somebody turning away in distaste. And it's not even so much the loss of sex, but the loss of intimacy, of closeness. That would be devastating. Sex is such a fundamental need that it pulls you through. Whatever you get, turns out to be enough. You crave it and it's there in whatever portion and whatever style you get it. But if you want to do it with somebody else, you need somebody who is extremely tolerant and loving.
We deal with a lot of couples and even caregivers who call the PCRI and they're just asking, does anybody else go through this? And I think even just saying that this is something that happens, but there's still intimacy. And intimacy doesn't necessarily have to be defined by how an erection is done. There's so much more to the relationship. And I've actually talked to a number of hormone therapy patients who have really, almost in some sense, had a more emotional connection to their partner because of the fact that they're on hormone therapy, and it does make them think a little differently. And that they've learned new ways of having intimacy. In fact, we had a couple that spoke at our conference back in 2019, and they did an intimacy course where the guy was on hormone therapy, and they talked about different ways that they found intimacy through those conversations and what that looked like, and how, the connection between a partner can really be so personal that you want to make sure to keep the personal and the intimate side, even in the lack of what could be considered a lack in some areas. So I do appreciate you mentioning that. How would you say that hormone therapy played into that conversation?
My head is no less enthusiastic than it ever was. It's just the rest of me. But St. Augustine had this famous quote about, "Lord, make me chaste, but not just yet." When it comes to hormone therapy, because my head is into it, but my body is dragging along, it's kind of the opposite. It's, "Lord, make me unchaste, but not just yet."
I got you. That makes sense. And honestly, I think that's a good picture of what hormone therapy can do and what men go through. Because you have the Lupron, and then you're on darolutamide as well,
That's
and you're
correct.
going into your second year of hormone therapy.
That's correct.
So just to follow up with the story, going back to kind of the treatment. So you had your surgery. Was there anything in between the surgery and the hormone therapy that happened, and how was that handled?
So it's a cascade of events, and my spirits were high all through it. So it actually gets a little complicated. And I had biochemical recurrence. My PSA went up after the surgery. I think it was a little less than a year. Um, which was a blow, but I knew they had ways to take care of it. What had happened though, so I got one of the very early PSMA scans, early for this country, and I was warned I had to sign a waiver saying you will be charged for this, and it cost $7,000, and I got it, and it found nothing, but the CT scan, the part that comes along with the PET scan for free and is not even a very good CT scan, noticed that there were spots on my lungs. Here again, like with the PSA, where I thought I was doing the right thing, here again, I arranged with the radiation oncologist. I said, if this is cancer in my lungs, there's no reason to give me salvage radiation to my prostate area. We made a deal. I would go on hormone therapy, and we would see whether these nodules in the lungs shrank. And if they shrank, we'd know they have prostate cancer. And if they grew or remained the same, we would know they weren't. We did precisely that experiment. They stayed the same size. And we went ahead with the salvage radiation. It turns out we didn't do the experiment quite right, because apparently 3 months is not enough time for them to shrink if we had waited longer. But on the other hand, if we'd waited longer, the salvage therapy would not have been as effective.
You found out that after your surgery that it was Gleason 8 instead of Gleason 3 plus 4 equals
That's
7,
that's
right?
right.
So
That's
you
right. Or
had
four
that
plus three.
4 plus 3. So yeah, you had that you had the Gleason 8 in mind. You saw these Mets. Now, are you in the 10% of patients where PSMA doesn't work at all?
So there is that fear with ductal. There have been papers, or at least one paper about it, and it has not been the case so far. It, the original PSMA scan showed nothing, but subsequently after the salvage radiation, when my PSA went up again, um, I had a repeat PSMA scan at the same PSA level. It's PSA point 0.2, and it unmistakably showed the Mets. I am PSMA avid, and also PSA is not a universal infallible test for whether you will show up.
Right. No, I think that's a very good point. And it's a good thing you had that CT scan. So you're starting your second year of hormone therapy. Have the lung mets shrank over time? Are they still present? Are they not present?
We haven't had a repeat scan. We're just looking at the PSA. If it goes up, I'm sure I'll be back on the table.
But for now, so what is your PSA before you started hormone therapy and then after?
We started it in the point 0.2 range, and it's now undetectable.
That's
So that was
awesome.
another fear. Ductal has a reputation of not being responsive to androgen deprivation. So it has been uncharacteristic in all kinds of wonderful ways. It shows up in the PSA, it shows up in the PSMA scan, and it responds to androgen deprivation.
Okay, so can you do me a favor and define ductal for the audience? Because I think it's one thing for Dr. Scholz or myself to say it, but it's different coming from a patient, your understanding, and then living with it.
I was very grateful that the pathologist identified this. I truly gained admiration for these doctors. This kind of type or subtype of prostate cancer occurs maybe 5% of the time, and that with all the kinds of tissue that they have to look at, that they spotted this outlier was wonderful. It is it's distinctive looking, and it has a confusing name, because there is also intraductal prostate cancer, which is similar in some ways, but fundamentally completely different. Intraductal is inside the ducts of the prostate cancer, and ductal is just a historic historic name. We talk about prostate cancer, and 90% of the time it's all the same thing. It's prostate adenocarcinoma. But some people find out, the other 10% find out that they have some subtype of prostate cancer, and mine happens to be this ductal. I also had intraductal, um, and one of the guys, one of the guys in the ANCAN group has something called foamy gland, which of course captures our attention.
Right.
So that's this variant. And on the one hand, I felt pleased that I didn't have a prostate cancer like everybody else's, but on the other hand, it's mostly downside.
Well, I think a point that you made previous to us starting this interview was that there was a correlation between ductal prostate cancer and urinary issues. Can you speak to that?
Oh, yes. So, and this is also it's also, if I'm remembering correctly, the case that DREs don't catch it. It grows predominantly in the urethra. So unlike other prostate cancers that might grow elsewhere in the prostate, this grows in such a way, it's positioned in such a way that it's guaranteed to give you problems urinating.
Thank you. No, that's a very good point. And again, it's not something that's often spoken about. So, when it comes to the treatments that you've had, is there any advice you would give to patients who are about to have surgery or have salvage radiation or hormone therapy that you just wish patients knew, either walking into the situation, maybe either from a practical mindset of things to do or from a perspective?
I'm reluctant to tell people to prepare for the worst because, as I say, cancer drives hard bargains. People come into the ANCAN group, and they may have been tough negotiators in their working life, and they think that they can drive a hard bargain, particularly about ADT. ADT may be all right for the rest of you guys, but I'm not, give me something else. And it's just, you can't make bargains like that. Although I've had to go through experiences that sound, in prospect, very unwelcome. Um, you know, ADT does things to your body. I look terrible. I just have to say goodbye to my vanity. Um, and these things, people don't want to think about them in prospect. They just seem too scary, but they're necessary. They're necessary because the alternative is, it makes them necessary. And the fact is that this is something you can do. Having been an ANCAN moderator for a while, there are misconceptions that I think are common that people have just about cancer treatment. A lot of readjustment comes in realizing there's no easy path through treatment. Hormone therapy is a classic example. The thought runs through everybody's mind. Hormone therapy might be fine for others, but I have a million reasons why it's wrong for me. So show me something else. So the first harsh reality is that cancer is a tougher negotiator than you. If you try to hold out for something better, you get offered something worse. The second harsh reality is that doctors have fewer options than we like to think. There probably isn't a drug for your XYZ mutation. The third harsh reality is that in cases where you do have a choice, the decision is rarely clear cut. The road has many forks and they're poorly marked, and you will always find yourself wondering whether the other way might have been better. And fourth, and this is really important to people who go off road and try to take a therapy that's not established. Just because the treatment approach makes sense does not mean that it works. We think that the man who puts hope and money in a false cure is a gullible fool. But I find he often turns out to be a thoughtful person who's heard a sensible explanation of why the treatment would work. The fact is, pharma companies follow this exact same path. They stake millions on therapies that they have every reason to think will work, and most end in failed clinical trials. So that's my fourth harsh reality. The odds are that something that looks great on paper is not going to help.
Well, no, all of those are very, very apt descriptions because I think that oftentimes there's so much money and there's so much incentivizing in the medical system, and there we got away from this age, especially with the FDA and everything of the concept in the back where it was a one cure all. You look at these Western movies back in the olden days and somebody's out there selling a bottle saying this is going to cure everything. And if you still watch pharma ads or anything, sometimes you still get that vibe. Sometimes you're talking to your doctor and he says, this is the treatment, but we're not dealing with the intricacies of that treatment. I think sometimes men go on hormone therapy and they don't even know what's about to hit them. They've had a 15-minute conversation with a physician. And this is me getting on my soapbox, but this is what I'm supposed to do. Like, there are side effects and there's certain things you can do to mitigate those side effects and certain things you can do that won't be mitigated. And so I appreciate the vulnerability in this conversation because I think it's so important for men and for partners to know what they are going to be facing. And if there are other ways to look at it, that's a good thing. I think that it's important to really keep an open mind when it comes to research and cancer and everything that's going, but also have some sense of cynicism going, you said this will work. But what are the downsides? What are the intricacies? And could I go and take a deeper look at this in order to make sure that this is something I really want to choose? Because I think a lot of times that gets overlooked. So what would you give as far as advice goes to patients who maybe they've been through similar treatments as you, and maybe they don't have as much of a positive outlook? What have been the things that have helped you keep a positive outlook through this? Because you're in a situation where intimacy is difficult, urination is difficult, you have these as more permanent side effects, and now you're on hormone therapy, and those side effects are also quite intense at times. And that's a lot to go through in your late 60s, early 70s for anybody. And this probably isn't what you were planning when you were dealing with retirement and the plans you made with your wife back then when you guys were planning your life out, but you have such a positive attitude. So what is the advice you would give to patients who maybe don't have that attitude or need help?
So certainly another shout out to my wife. Having a home environment that's not oppressive, having a home environment that's supportive, not having a home environment to add to the troubles that you already have is so important. And I am so grateful. Yet another reason I'm grateful to my wife. So that certainly is very important. And it's not something people can easily change at this point, unfortunately. As an engineer, I thought I didn't care about cells. I cared about transistors. Transistors were important. Cells were old stuff. And that's changed. It's hard not to think of cancer as a senseless killer on the loose and scientists as keystone cops unable to stop it. But there's another way to view this, which is actually more true. And that's to look on cancer as an evil genius. Because, cancer isn't just cells on a growth spurt. If you happen to be a cell with crazy ideas, the body has all sorts of ways to stop you. Cancer cells are elite. They have evaded every one of these defenses. And to them, this isn't a joyride. The aim of cancer is nothing less than total domination. So that's scary, but it's also breathtaking. The way I've dealt with my own cancer is to replace fear with awe. The body's battle against cancer is a face-off between two determined geniuses, your body and the cancer. And whoever wins, I want a seat at ringside. And that's where the blog comes in. Even in small ways, there are many dark corners in our treatment that we would like to understand better. We read about cells expressing PSMA. But what does that mean? Does the PSMA bubble out? Is it coated on the cell like a coat of paint? Is enzalutamide really a little Pac-Man running through our blood, gobbling testosterone that Lupron is left over? I had a teacher once who said that just as birds are meant to fly, humans are made to learn. And I think that many of us would like to learn better how our disease works. What I've tried to do is create a popular science of prostate cancer. It's not focused on what treatments to get. For that, you can turn to excellent resources like Dr. Scholz's, but on what's under the hood.
Well, I've read it And I read it back earlier this year in
Hmm.
January when it was sent to me for the first time. But I have to say, I really enjoyed it because I'm a prostate cancer educator, men's health
Uh,
educator when it comes to treatments and different things like that. But I love the way you described it. I learned new things and it was put in a way that was very understandable, very visual. And I think that it meets both the audible and the visual learner very well. So I really appreciate you writing that because the perspective of how you broke it down was intricate but entertaining at the same time, which I really think is quite difficult to do at times. I very much appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for reading it, and thank you for getting it so well. You really, you really appreciated what I'd hoped to convey. So thank you
Well, you
very much.
conveyed it. You conveyed it very well. I was like very impressed that it's like a prostate cancer popular mechanics, as you say. I mean, even when I like opened it up and I scrolled the titles, the prostate cancer mugshot pathology thing made me laugh so hard because it's so true. It's like in one sentence, you were able to help the pictures say words I hadn't heard before. I know pictures say 1,000 words, but I think what I really want to focus on now is the psychological impact of prostate cancer. It's very interesting to me personally. You know, I'm a 31-year-old woman who was handed the book Invasion of the Prostate Snatchers at 18, didn't know what a prostate was, read the book and was opened up into this whole new world where men were going into surgery and there were side effects that I had never heard of. And I walked in a world where I respected all these men that I grew up with and knew were older, and I have no idea that they were dealing with the issues that they were dealing with. And I think that when people think of aging, especially in males, we think of osteoporosis and we don't want cancer, but we don't really think about prostate cancer specifically, even though it's so common. I think a lot of men kind of go, okay, yeah, when I get older, I may have this issue and that issue. That's part of aging. I think for some men, prostate cancer really sneaks up on them. It's a huge impact on their sexual life, on their urinary life, on everyday life. And it becomes so overwhelming and so fearful that a lot of times they get just rushed into surgery, get stuck in this mill, and then all of a sudden they're not really sure what to do afterwards. So, what would you give as far as advice goes to a patient who has the side effects that are similar to yours, and from a psychological level, they're kind of embarrassed and they're not able to be as vulnerable as they really should be in order to get the help they need?
I would run, and I've had a couple of falls, and they left me injured. And the way it's still, and that was quite a downer. But the way I started to think about it, I was driving a 2005 Honda uh, with many, many dings, and I realized this is just another ding on my chassis. And there've been a lot, there'll be more. It's 2005 Honda. I wore those dings with pride. No one was going to mess with me because I had nothing to lose. This helped me a lot. If I could just think about these these incapacitations that I have no way to fix, these impediments. If I could think of them as nothing more than dents in the chassis, and the car still runs. I get where I need to go.
How did you
But
make peace with that? Because I think even younger men who are diagnosed, those dings have an effect. Older men, when they're diagnosed, everybody, especially in males, there's certain things that you take pride in. And those dings can have a psychological impact. You seem to have an immense amount of peace with that, life moves on and you're still here. So is it your passion for living and still living life and you're still here? Is it a certain positive outlook? Is there something that keeps you going in between that make those dings seem less significant?
moving on is a cliche, but literally the words moving on, you really do have to move past what's happened to you. Um, yeah, you can look at yourself. I do look at myself in the mirror, and I can't believe what has happened. I worked so hard to lose weight, in my 40s. And now it's come roaring back, and I cannot believe my eyes. But the fact is, you have to move on in the literal sense. You have to stop thinking about that, um, and think about other things. One of the guys in the ANCAN group who has since passed away, I got to thank him before he died for saying this. He had been told, be bitter about the things you've lost or be grateful for the things that you have. And I liked that.
I definitely agree with that. I personally have lost a lot of people over my short lifespan, and had many deaths even recently. And it just makes me even more grateful for the time that I have with wonderful people like you, the opportunity to work with PCRI. But, I think your perspective is crucial. I think that many people are not willing to talk about what they've gone through. I think that sometimes men go through prostate cancer and they don't even tell their families. And no one knows. And that they may be in a situation where maybe they don't have somebody to find support in. But I want to bring it back to the concept of support. One of my biggest concerns about men is the psychological impact and the things that they're dealing with silently. There's the emotional impact. There's the physical impact that's tremendous. There's a sexual impact that is tremendous. But, when I think of a person, I don't love just one part of my husband. I love all of him. I want the psychological impact that he's going through, whatever that may be, for whatever situation, to be healthy as well. You are part of Answer Cancer and CAN. And this was founded, I believe, by Rick Davis. And I am such an advocate for support groups because yes. Prostate cancer to me didn't really become real until I started going to support groups in person myself. So back when I was younger, I worked in Dr. Scholz's practice, and I was just this young intern trying to learn about prostate cancer, and I would get to go to support group talks with him. And I'll never forget the day I walked in and Dr. Scholz, it brings me to tears because it's so hard. I never would have thought these men went through what they went through. But he asked them, how many of you guys are in diapers? 50% of the room raised their hand. How many of you guys can no longer have normal sexual intimacy with your partner, what is defined as normal by maybe previous terms before prostate cancer? And like 60-70% of the men raised their hands. And from my young perspective, I was so ignorant. I had no idea that it was so widespread, and that the men started talking and they started sharing about the impact that this has had on their lives and how mentally and emotionally difficult it was. And some of them even said that the only way that they really found a way to get through it was through that support group. Now, something I've seen since COVID happened, we really pushed support groups. We had them at our in-person conferences, and then COVID happened and so many people went virtual. And now it's a kind of a thing of, I think there's less support. I think that the support structures are still there, but people are maybe not reaching out or understanding the importance of them. So can you talk about your advanced support group that you help moderate with ANCAN, the importance of what you see as lives are being changed within it, and the partnerships that you have with other people in order to help support them, not just on a physical, let's get you through these side effects, an emotional level, but mentally as well?
I think men as a class have problems that keep them from helping each other. I do agree that support groups are very important. And I think the video nature of ANCAN has helped us enormously. We were able to make use of it. We're able to leverage it to become a much more effective organization than if we were little groups meeting in a library. I hate to take the broad brush and blame culture, but it would be different if men had the kinds of relationships that women have. While I am very proud of things that go on at ANCAN, one thing that always gives me pause is we are not there for each other emotionally in the way that women would be. I wish I could do something about that. It just seems to be a presumptive current against being demonstrative. I mean, I guess that's what it is. This is a place, so I talked about people not wearing signs. This is a place where you have a sign. This is a place where everybody knows what's going on with you. And this is a place where you can share these kinds of experiences. And while men can be very frank about what their issues are, and that's good for them and it's good for us, sometimes sometimes it feels a little bit like one of these anechoic chambers where you say something and there's no echo, there's no response. People, sometimes there is. I can't be overly harsh. Sometimes people will talk about a great report they got from their doctor, and people will say something, but in general, it's difficult for men. And I once told a friend of mine, I wish it was more like like tween girls, and you know, all the way out there. And he said, my husband teaches tween girls. He said, be careful what you wish for.
There is that. I get that. I have daughters who talk a lot, and I was a teenage girl. I understand what he's saying. But I also appreciate the nature of what you're saying, because I do wish that men had that emotional support that you're speaking of. But I will say that I think, you and I may not know exactly what to do about it, but I think the vulnerability that you showed today and the just opening up and being able to share and have that conversation is definitely a start. But I really appreciate the vulnerability that you show, because I think it's going to encourage a lot of other men to be vulnerable. And I hope that these videos encourage other men. Even if you find one person to go talk to, one person to have that conversation with, I think it's tremendously powerful. So thank you so much for joining us today. I can't wait to have you on the channel again. There's so much more we could talk about, but I really appreciate this, because I wasn't expecting for you to be so transparent and to allow us to have a picture of the intimacies and intricacies of your life. But it's going to have a tremendous impact on patients, because they're going through these things in silence. And for you to speak out about them and just share publicly like this, I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you for being such an empathic interviewer and making it easy to do that.
So as you've heard me talk to Ben, there's a couple of key points I really want you to pay attention to. Share your story with somebody else. If you're going to learn the intricacies of prostate cancer, your experience matters, and it can help a lot of people. Ben is one of those people where he's taken a really tough situation and he's turned it into something incredible, where he's giving his life away. He's writing, he's moderating, different support groups. He's helping people who have gone through a similar journey. And I would encourage you to do the same. If you have prostate cancer, people need to know about your experiences. We're so much better as a community and so much better together. So please also go subscribe to his blog, Progression: A Deep Look at Prostate Cancer. It does an incredible job of looking at the deep, intricacies of prostate cancer, explaining it in a way that's understandable and also relatable. And the visuals are really great, but also it takes that big picture concept and kind of matches it against the intricacies so that you get a really good context, both big picture and the intricacies together. And that link will be in the description below of this video, so please go subscribe. I can't thank him enough for being here, and share your stories. If you would like more videos like this, please comment in our comment section below this video. Give us a thumbs up and let us know your stories as well. Again, the more we share, we're going to be better as far as an outcome. Thanks.